Welcome back. 2019 has been an historic year for many reasons, but one bit of history is being made right here. As the Miami Herald reported, new figures by the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement showed that for fiscal year 2019, the number of Cubans taken into custody by ICE was 1,179. In 2018, it was 463, and in 2017, it was just 160. Joining me this morning to dig a little deeper into these numbers are Professor Juan Gomez, who is an expert in immigration law and has been fighting on behalf of immigrant rights for years. He is a director of the Carlos A. Costa Immigration and Human Rights Clinic at Florida International University College of Law. Thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you for the invitation.
So let's start with these numbers, and then we'll work out from there. This is a dramatic increase that we've seen in just 2 years, to go from 160 to almost 1,200.
With promises of revving up.
Of revving up even more.
Yes.
So first, let's define who we think these people are. Are these folks who are coming, who are picked up during ICE raids, or are these more likely people who are coming across the border, being detained, held for a while, and then sent back to Cuba? Do we know?
It's not just people who come in across the border. It's people who, for example, present themselves at a port of entry, and at the port of entry, they, under the migration agreement with Mexico, they're sent back to Mexico now. But you have a large population of individuals who presented themselves to apply for asylum, and then they are, if they pass credible fear, they are then sent on in removal proceedings to a hearing. You have situations where most of them, or many of them, have been sent to isolated places in Louisiana, and they're being sent intentionally to places that are sort of what we call asylum-free zones, places where you're not going to get asylum.
Yeah, the chance of you having an attorney like you might have in Miami, fairly remote. You're held in parish jails most often than not. The immigration courts there are even harsher than they are here in South Florida. The deck is stacked against you.
It is. Well, you have to remember now that immigration judges now literally have a dashboard in front of them, where if they continue a case on the day of the hearing, of the date of the merits hearing, they are dinged. It goes against their evaluation. What kind of a judge is this that is already going to be punished for continuing a case? The judge is allowed to be a judge or not. But then here you also intentionally, you have individuals, you're completely correct, that they're being isolated from resources. The legal community cannot defend these individuals. People in Texas, you have some national firms that are trying to go out there and help people. And this isn't just with Cubans, this is with others. Mm-hmm. But especially with Cubans, you see these intentional isolation, which is, for all the criticism of the prior administration, this administration is feeding more into what the Castro government has wanted.
Well, let me ask you that, because that's what jumped out at me. And yes, we could be talking about a number of different people from different parts of the country, and the number, of people being denied is increasing. But for the Cuban number is what strikes me, because, I would have thought that you would have heard much more outrage. The notion of sending Cubans back to Cuba, to a totalitarian regime, a dictatorial regime, that used to spark outrage in Miami if anyone was sent back. What's happened?
The silence is tragic and just so sad, because I don't understand. Colleagues of mine, we have tried to go to individuals who normally were activists, for human rights in Cuba, who are activists for justice here in the United States. They had spent decades fighting for rights. And now the response we get, oh, we don't want to be political. There's a certain fear. We don't understand. This administration blocks tourism to Cuba, but is willing to send Cubans back. And we're not talking about, and the discussion is, you'll have people say, oh, they're criminal Cubans. And in other words, Cubans who've committed criminal offenses here. That's a percentage of these individuals. Most of these individuals, and let's first go to that group. Most of those individuals took orders of deportation or removal years ago with a promise that, oh, don't worry, Cubans don't get deported. So they didn't fight for their rights because they were told, oh, we're just going to release you. So they didn't have due process. Then you have the Cubans who recently arrived, and they're applying for asylum. And the problem is, without access to counsel, and you have judges across the country, experts across the country, that show the significant difference in winning cases when you have an attorney advocating for someone versus someone speaking for themselves. We see a new wave of repression in Cuba. We see section chiefs using the old tools like dangerousness against individuals. And I'm not talking about just the big human rights activists. I'm talking about the low-level, socioeconomically deprived individual in Cuba who is facing repression and comes here, hopes to seek protection, but the cards are stacked against them.
Are you suggesting that it's in part because Cubans, who majority of whom seem to be Republican, who have come out and been supportive of President Trump, are cowed by the idea of they don't want to challenge President Trump or make President Trump look bad, so they're willing to sacrifice their own brethren to go back to Cuba?
It's a mix of that. It's part of the mindset is, and I've experienced this for a while now, of people who are inside the door. In other words, and these aren't just Cubans, others who are people.
Once you get here, then
I'm in the door. My family's safe. I'm safe. Let's close the door behind me. It's sort of like, I've eaten, close the kitchen now. Forget those who are hungry. And it's
we've
shameful.
Experienced this with the Marelitos, the Balseros, but is there something different now?
Well, the mindset is, oh, these are different. These are different. And of course, we go back to, remember Pastor Neumallers, they came for, the mindset of they came for this person, they came for this person, but in the end, when they came for me, there was no one. Well, it's the same mindset. One of the funniest things is that we have people who portray themselves as being anti-immigration because they're law and order until it affects their family. And then they come to us and they say, oh, can you help my relative? My relative is different from everyone else. And they're not. Everyone should be given justice in the courts. Everyone should be given a real opportunity. Without this, it's like a juggernaut of injustice, a machine to deport individuals. In one of the reports that we have, one of the great resources in terms of information, that we've been receiving information that the U.S. government is actually paying the Cuban government per head. We would like confirmation, yes or no.
Let's just hold there for a second, because that's a stunning statement. So there have been reports, we've discussed this, there have been reports, which we have not been able to confirm, but the reporting is from some ICE officials that the United States, in order to convince Cuba to take back these individuals, are basically saying, if you take back this person, we'll send some money to you to take them back. Because if Cuba doesn't accept them back, you don't have the flight. No other country really has that ability to sort of cut it off. Cuba does, so you're having to pay Cuba.
Yes, we would like to see whatever agreements there are. We'd like to know yes or no. Is the U.S. government, is this administration paying the Cuban government to receive Cubans back?
That's a fascinating question. I apologize, we're going to have to leave it there, but that's one that we will certainly be picking up because that deserves answers. Imagine the irony if the Trump administration, this administration, was providing a lifeline in terms of financial resources to Cuba by deporting Cubans back to the island. A fascinating story. All right, we'll be right back after the break.